A woman in France woke up one morning convinced she was a corpse, and no amount of evidence could change her mind. Psychiatrists had a simple explanation for her. Cotard's delusion, they said, was a rare delusional disorder where the patient denies the reality of their own living body. The standard textbook account goes like this. Damage to the brain circuits that process self-recognition, combined with depressive thinking, creates a gap between what the body reports and what the mind believes. The person becomes convinced they are dead, decayed, or don't exist. Straightforward neurology, a broken feedback loop. I've read the case files myself. They're methodical, clinical, almost tidy in their explanations, and that explanation holds up until you actually meet one of these patients. Then the tidy story falls apart. The condition was first documented in the 1880, named after a French neurologist's observations. Most cases involve people with severe depression, some with schizophrenia, occasionally following brain injury or infection. The delusion is specific, not just sadness or hopelessness, but an absolute, unshakable conviction that their body is dead, decomposing, or never existed at all. Some patients refuse to bathe because corpses don't need hygiene. Others won't eat. A few have shown up at morgues asking to be placed with the bodies. The delusion isn't metaphorical, it's absolute. And here's where the standard explanation breaks down, showing them evidence doesn't work. Mirror them their own reflection, their own pulse, their warm skin. None of it registers as real. If this were simply a broken sensory circuit, a failure to process touch or proprioception, then external evidence should bypass the damage. A thermometer reading should convince them. A video of themselves moving should prove life. But it doesn't. And that's the first crack in the textbook story. The brain isn't just receiving bad data. Something deeper is wrong. The real picture emerges when you look at what these patients actually say about their experience. They don't deny the facts. A woman knows her heart is beating. She knows she's breathing. She knows she's standing and moving. But she also knows with the same certainty that none of those things are real. That's not delusion in the psychiatric sense of a false belief. That's something stranger, a collapse of what we might call the coherence of self. Here's where philosophy enters the room. Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." He was trying to find one unshakable foundation for existence. But what happens when the thinking part, the conscious mind, decides that the I am part is false? When your own reasoning, your own logic, becomes the mechanism of your own negation. That's what's happening in Cotard's. Recent neuroimaging has shown something crucial that the old textbooks missed. In Cotard patients, the emotional centers of the brain, the limbic system, particularly regions tied to self-referential feeling, show dampened activity. But here's the twist. The logical, rational parts of the brain are often intact. So the person is left with a functional reasoning engine attached to a broken emotional sense of self. They can think perfectly well. They just can't feel that they exist. And that distinction between thinking and feeling is the real explanation. Cotard's delusion isn't a failure to process information. It's a failure to feel real. The person's sense of self, their felt presence in the world, has been severed from their reasoning mind. One patient I read about described it this way: "I know I'm alive, but I don't feel alive, not poetically. Literally, this matters because it reveals something profound about what we mean by self and reality. We assume reality is something objective, external, that we perceive, and we assume the self is something we think about. But Cotard's patients show us that the self isn't primarily a thought. It's a feeling. It's the lived sense of being here now, in this body, in this world. Without that feeling, all the objective evidence in the world becomes irrelevant. Think about your own sense of being alive. It's not something you have to prove to yourself every morning. It's not a logical conclusion. It's a background hum of existence that you feel continuously. When you're absorbed in work, you don't think about it. When you're in conversation, you don't verify it. The sense of self is so fundamental that we mistake it for obvious, inevitable, beyond question. Cotard's patients lose that hum, and the loss is total. What makes this relevant to how you live right now? Because in modern life, we're all at risk of a mild, chronic version of this. Not the delusion itself, but the disconnection. We think constantly about who we are, what we should be doing, whether we're succeeding. And in that relentless thinking, we can lose the felt sense of simply being alive. We become minds without embodied presence. We verify our existence through external metrics instead of feeling it directly. The Stoics understood this. They taught that the good life comes not from thinking about yourself, but from feeling your way into right action. Marcus Aurelius didn't ask himself, "Am I a good emperor?" He felt his duty and acted from that feeling. The mind follows the feeling, not the other way around. When the feeling is gone, when the sense of aliveness is gone, all the right thinking in the world becomes hollow. Cotard's delusion, then, isn't just a psychiatric curiosity. It's a window into what the self actually is. Not a story you tell yourself, not a logical identity, but a felt presence, a continuous, embodied sense of being alive that precedes all thinking and all evidence. When that feeling is intact, reality is obvious. When it's gone, all the evidence in the world becomes noise. The practical implication: if you've been living in your head, constantly evaluating and analyzing yourself, you might be building the conditions for a quieter version of this disconnection. Not pathological, but real. The antidote isn't more thinking. It's a return to felt presence, to breathing, to the simple, non-negotiable fact of being in a body, moving through time, alive right now. That's what Cotard's delusion teaches us, if we're willing to listen. The self is not primarily a thought. It's a feeling. And when we lose that feeling, whether through illness or through the slow erosion of constant abstraction, we lose the ground beneath everything else. All the logic, all the evidence, all the external validation becomes irrelevant because the felt sense of being here has vanished. The question, then, isn't whether Cotard's delusion is real or rational. It's this: how much of your own sense of self are you actually feeling, as opposed to thinking about? How much of your aliveness is direct, present, embodied? And how much of it have you outsourced to your mind's constant evaluation? That gap, however small, is where the fragmentation begins. Recovery from Cotard's, when it happens, doesn't come from better arguments or more evidence. It comes from a return of that felt sense, through therapy, through medication that restores emotional processing, sometimes through time. The person doesn't think their way back to being alive. They feel their way back. And that's perhaps the deepest truth this condition has to teach. We are fundamentally beings who feel, not beings who think. The thinking comes after. Subscribe for essays on the philosophy of self, presence, and what the mind's strange